Captain Mike Beaver Burkhart, thank you for joining me yet again on the podcast here.
Well, thank you once again for having me, Kim. It's always a pleasure.
Before we get into what I wanted to cover for this one, which was kind of filling in some blanks on some of the points you made in our first visit, for the sake of those that have not seen episode 28 from 7 months ago, remind us what boat do you run and tell us about the boat.
I'm captain on the John M. Donnelly. It's a heavy tow vessel, 9,180 horsepower that runs the lower Mississippi. And when we have water, I push 40 barges. Right now, it's a little sparse, so we're running reduced tow sizes. But I've been on the river since 1979, and so I've been out here about 42 years. And I work for Ingram Marine, and I'm very privileged to do so. It's a good company to be with.
Speaking of low water, how is that treating you?
It's to me, it's one of the features that makes our job on the Mississippi and all of its tributaries so interesting is that you're not sitting at a desk seeing the same scenery day after day. What makes the river to me, one of the things that makes it so interesting is that you never know what you're going to face when you get behind the sticks. Low water, high water, bar buildups, different tow configurations. And the low water has been challenging because it's not quite historically low, but it is a long run. And that presents its own set of challenges. There are bars building up where you wouldn't expect, more water in places that you're not expecting it. The Corps doing all they can to stay ahead of it. But it is the Mississippi, and it has its own mind and its own way of doing things. And that's what makes us who we are.
Speaking of which, I just saw a report this morning. I believe one of our vessels had actually pulled over to let some southbound traffic pass, and by the time they were ready to go, they could not get off ground.
That happens quite often in these conditions because you can pull out to the edge of the what is the navigable channel. A 6-inch drop in the water level can beat you. Not so much because you go hard aground, but because everything you do creates a suction that makes your situation worse. Because when you start moving water and there's no place for it to go, it will actually create its own sandbars underneath your tow because the water is going to follow the path of least resistance, and the sand is going to stop where there's other sand, and that's usually off to the corner of your toe. So it gets interesting.
Any interesting stories of low water with you at the sticks?
Oh, gracious. Most of it is just near heart attacks. You know about the sounding devices that we have on each corner of the tow, and on a 1,000-foot long tow, it's like driving. When I was in high school, I had a 1968 Buick Electra 225, and that thing had a hood that seemed like it's like 17 feet long. You could get half the senior class in that car. And driving a tow in low water feels like that old car because you've got the power to go, but it's so long you're not sure where you're going. And going along in low water conditions, your focus is on all of the points that you watch at any time navigating, but those sounders are critical. And so you're always watching them. And of course, every boat will have them set at a level that if I get in, for me and my pilot, it's between 10 and 12 feet of water. When that thing starts alarming, that means 10 is probably the most you have. And all I can say is that's really good cardio because every time that thing goes off, I'm like, oh God, oh God, oh God, please don't let that be the deepest water here, And so you start praying. And so that's interesting because there's a hyper alertness that takes place in low water on that side of it. High water, of course, has its own challenges. And I think experience comes in a lot in some of these. There's been some groundings that probably didn't need to happen simply because some individuals, not because of incompetence or any lack of skills behind the stick, but because they do not know the river and they don't know the familiar patterns of where the water actually runs. People will veer off the beaten path, not even a half a toe width, and they stop, whereas others will, continue running on by and would have done so until then. So it's challenging.
just to compare notes from a previous episode, what do you think is the toughest spot to transit, whether it's a bridge, any bend between Columbus and New Orleans?
Well, there again, it depends on river conditions. The bridges, it's sort of anomalous again. In high water, the river is wonderful because you can pretty much go wherever you want if you know where the dikes and what have you are. But the bridges are ferocious because a lot of people that don't run the river aren't aware that bridges are built from an engineering standpoint. The closer the banks are together, the less materials you have to put into a bridge. Well, those conditions happen to exist in the bight of a bend. Well, from a towboating perspective, when you're going down and the bridge is in a bend, Isaac Newton's laws are already working against you in good condition because, you know, the old object in motion wants to stay in motion. That means whichever pier is to your down side wants to come at you. And then you add high current pushing on you from that opposite side. Bridges can be quite challenging. Low water, of course, you just got the simple fact of, one, you have to watch where you run. Two, you have to be hyper vigilant about where you go because meeting places are reduced simply because of the depth of the water and the narrowness of the channel. And then when you get down in below the Baton Rouge Bridge, where you've got ship traffic, tug traffic coming in and out and managing the fleets, that can be quite challenging in pretty much any stage of the river, simply because of the massive traffic density. And that one, I would rather run the lower corridor in low water because at least you don't have the current working on you. In high water, from Baton Rouge to the Gulf, it's a demolition derby. And it's the grace of God and the skill of the mariners that operate down there that we don't see a lot more collision type situations. But there again, I think it's a testament to the professionalism of the people in our industry.
Any interesting stories to share from your time at the Sticks running with 40 barges in front of you?
Well, when I first got turned loose with, well, not first, but sometime shortly after being turned loose, there was a production company that made that show Little People, Big World that was thinking about trying to do one of these reality shows about the river and, you know, the excitement that would go through and what have you. And they got on the boat that I was on, the Carol McManus, and was filming. And down around Triangle Fleet, which you're very familiar with, you know, the little point there at Triangle is fairly benign at this point, but in high water, it can be pretty challenging. And I was coming downstream. I'm going to go back into the fleet there at Triangle, and there was a ship coming north, and we'd made arrangements for him to meet me above the point on the one whistle, port side to port side, left to left, for those of you who aren't familiar. Perfect arrangement. Well, about that time, a third party with a couple of barges working one of those grain elevators popped out and didn't take the current into consideration and fell out in front of that ship. Well, that ship had to steer away from him, and that meant he steered toward me. And I'm not claiming any great exercise in judgment, but there weren't any options other than what I told that ship pilot. I said, you point at me till you can't stand it, and then you steer off my side, and I'm going to steer toward your stern. And we just did a ballet, and we weren't 40 feet apart when we passed one another. And after I got my underwear out of my shoulder blades, the producer that was filming said, "Wow, Captain Burkhart, what is your first reaction to that situation?" And I said, "Well, I believe 1 depends per watch may not be sufficient." And so that was one of the more interesting things, because I was told when I first got in the wheelhouse, the difference between a pilot and a boat operator is that a pilot is continually anticipating disaster and making contingencies to avoid it, whereas a boat operator does a knee jerk when the situation comes upon him. And that is one of the greatest lessons I ever learned is I don't even know that except for in extreme situations that I even consciously know that I'm doing it. But when you're going into a situation with another vessel or a fixed structure like a dock or a bridge, you automatically start with the worst case scenario, and then work your way back to the why, and how can I keep myself from getting into this? And that will give you the instincts and the skill sets to avoid the type of thing that could have happened with my, and that was a chemical ship, and that would have been a really, really lovely situation. But those type of thought patterns and how shall I say, anticipation is why we don't have the number of crashes that we do.
Well, walk me through that moment at the sticks with a camera in your wheelhouse.
Okay. Well, like I said, I had made the arrangements, and once you set up a scenario, a meeting or passing arrangement, I had fallen into the groove to make sure that I performed my half of the task as I should. I was watching that tug, and normally they just run right up that east bank and go between their elevators. And I was watching him, but there again, there's a lot of things that happen on the periphery when you're at the stick. So I was going along, and I was thinking ship. Going to meet him. I was already thinking about backing into the fleet and the work that we were going to have to perform there. When that tug started topping out, I called him. And of course, he gave me the old, oh no, skipper, I'm just going to widen out here and head on up. So, okay, but like I said, that's one of the things that only experience can bring. I was watching him, and I could already tell he wasn't topping, he was setting out. He had gotten broadside of the current, and that little vessel he had didn't have the horsepower to hoss that thing around the way he thought it would. And like I said, I'm not blaming that guy. He might have been green. He might not have ever worked in high current. But these are the types of things that, to me, brings the skill set to a professional. Once I saw that, I contacted the ship, and the ship pilot called me and said, this isn't looking good. And so with the available room, I looked, and I couldn't go too far to the west bank because we've got anchor fleets over there. And, there's a loading, a ship loader right there above the point. And so I didn't have a lot of latitude, because people that aren't aware of what we do, you don't steer right beside something in current because of all that weight. Once I start a steer, I'm going to go, in the opposite direction. So I had to kind of anticipate how much fall room do I have without getting on that fleet. And of course, that ship pilot was making the same calculations. How can I steer around but still have the room to make my turn? And thank the Lord, my numbers were right that time. And once I saw that I had room to get around him, but we were going to have to do this properly, that's when I suggested to him that he just took the nose of his ship and just walked up the side of my tow as he was making his steer. And I just steered around him and just made kind of a parabola around his. And like I said, I'm not claiming any miraculous powers. All good, competent operators, they have this in the back of their mind, that in the event of something falling off course, which it does more often than not, what am I going to do? And part of the exercise of standing a watch is I look at points, I look at fleets, I look at this, and like I said, my peers do it even better than I do, and go, what would happen if? And if you're continually doing that, when if does occur, it's not a freeze up moment. And that's all the difference in the world, because one of the best operators, one of my peers told me, never give up till you see sparks. He said, because there's always that chance. And I've seen that to be true, and I haven't seen many sparks, thank you, Lord, because of it.
Indeed. Tell me what you can about the history and application of the vernacular we use for passing arrangements, the 1 and 2 whistle, things like that.
Okay, well, it came from the old sailing days, when vessels would get within sight of one another, and the only means they had of communicating was either by bell, whistle, or flag. And the 1 whistle, of course, is my port to your port. And that usually had a lot to do with the windward side, coming into coals and that sort of thing. The 2 whistles would be my starboard to your starboard. And that, like I said, that came about from the sailing vessel days. And then went on the river, because we are on a narrow waterway, it really is a lot more simple for us, because we don't have but 1 or 2 directions to go. You can't just take off into the blue. But back in the steamboat days, it was extremely important to make sure you understood these signals, because vessels would come into what was known as a blind bend. The Mississippi, of course, as we all know, is one bend after another. And if I were southbound and I were approaching a bend, I would signal my intention. I'm coming around. Any vessel below, I will see you on the one. Well, the vessel below would understand I intend to meet him port to port. If he had any discrepancy with that, he would sound the two whistle. And that would let me know, no, he wants to wait on the two. Well, knowing the river, I would go, well, I don't know that that's best. And southbounders have the right of way according to the rules of the road. And that's always been an accepted practice. And we would work it out. And then as we approached, when we both gave the same signal, I would give a one and he'd give a one, then we knew it was agreed without having ever seen one another that we were going to pass port to port, or left to left and right to right, as it would be known to most. And with the advent of radio, we still use the term, I will see you on the one whistle or the two whistle, simply because that's an understood means of communication, that when I say I'm going to see you on the one, he understands. And we're going to see left to left, port to port. And that's just evolved into the vernacular. And that's part of how we speak.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that. Getting back, of course, episode 28 was our first meeting, which for those that haven't seen it, it'd be great if you did. It was the third most views on my YouTube channel thus far. About 7 months ago, we met and we discussed a fair amount, sort of broad strokes from your childhood through your career to now, and what you're doing extracurricularly, of course. Mm-hmm. But let's begin working through some details of your story. I want to talk from childhood all the way up to the point of that evening in that jail cell that you discussed in such detail. Mm-hmm. But I want to begin. You made mention of your father, your grandfather, and the chief engineer uncle that you had. I'd love to know more about each of their stories and how that tied into your development.
Okay, well, my grandfather was he actually fought in World War I. He was nearly 40 years older than my grandmother when they married. So granddaddy was old when I came up, and he actually fought in France in World War I. And so when I grew up, granddaddy Burkhart, or Mr. Will, as everyone knew him, I'm the run of the litter. I'm the smallest in my family. Granddaddy was a big old man that always wore bib overalls, and he was everything that you would want from the cool I hope I can be half to my granddaughter what granddaddy Burkhart, because he always had time to sit down with me. I would sit on the back porch with him, and he would listen to Cardinals games on the radio and smoke his pipe. And he was a great comfort. He always had time. He taught me things about, being in the woods and gardening and that sort of thing. He was kind of the calm influence in my life. And I lost him when I was 12. But granddaddy Burkhart was something. He was half Cherokee. My great grandmother, her name was Molly Stamper. She was what they called a holdout Cherokee from the mountains of East Tennessee. The state of Tennessee didn't even recognize she and her husband's marriage until like in the late 40s, because they did not recognize white and Indian marriages. And if you see some of my grandfather, my dad, and my brothers, they have the very dark, wiry hair and the darker complexion from that lineage. And so that was kind of cool. And I remember seeing the photograph of her when I was a boy. And because, like I said, it wasn't something that was discussed. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and you just didn't talk about, things that weren't spectacular about your family. And when granddaddy got back from World War I, he farmed some. And then he worked during the Depression. He worked in logging and construction camps for the CCP. And then he came back home and he farmed and retired from that. My dad was born in 1935, and daddy was a Korean War veteran. He went in as the war was winding down. He was a military policeman. We never had a lot of discussion about what he saw, but evidently things were a little tough during that time. I don't know. We didn't go into great detail. I've heard some things, but I won't go into them now because I don't know what is factual and what is not. But when he got out, daddy built grain bins. He worked with a guy that built grain bins. And what shaped who my father was as the man I knew. When I was very young growing up, my father was he was the guy that came in. He partied a little bit and got around and did that, but he came in, he took care of the family. In 1966 or 7, I can't remember now, it's been so long, Dad was working on a grain bin in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And it was a silage auger. And I don't know if you're familiar with what they do, but silage augers, they put whole stalks of green corn in, and there are these rotating belts full of knives that chop that up real finely, and it sets and ferments, and they give it to dairy cattle because it produces milk. Well, they were setting this thing up, and the scaffolding collapsed, and my dad fell into that rig, and it literally cut him in half. It eviscerated him, and it cut his left leg nearly off on the back side, except for the femoral artery and the bone. And he fell down through that thing. And he literally reinserted his intestines and pulled himself out to a truck. And they got him to a hospital. And I remember I was 9 maybe. We got a call and they got Mother down because they were going to give him his last rites because it didn't look good. But Burkharts are hard to kill. We're like cats. You got to get us to the head or we're not going. And he made it through it. And I won't dishonor my father, but and I'm not making excuses for things. But when he got out of all that, he was in horrific pain because, like I said, the leg always hurt, and the intestinal damage. I was too young to know the extent, but he hurt all the time. And they had him on morphine when he got out, and that was something he wasn't comfortable with. So he started drinking to knock the edge off. And to segue that into what I do now, I don't make excuses, but I do understand that no one wakes up when they're 6, yawns and goes, you know what? I'm going to be a drunk. I'm going to be a drug addict. I'm going to do all of the things that go with these affiliated lifestyles and just destroy any goodness that will be in my life. But it does catch up with you. And in Dad's case, the drinking knocked the edge off the pain. And at some point, the monkey saddled him up and it got on his back. And he didn't come around a lot, and all the behaviors changed. He wasn't my father in a lot of ways. He was the product of what that addiction did to him. And that shaped me. He stopped working, in construction because he couldn't do it. And he started running a truck stop that was everything from a bordello to a gambling den. Pretty much any sin you could imagine that would take place in the South took place in this place. And matter of fact, I learned to drive hauling whiskey in this station wagon that they'd gutted out. It had one little tiny piece of a seat in the front, and they would fill it with whiskey. And because I was underage, I could drive this thing over a hill, and I would park it, and I would jog back to the truck stop. And a few hours later, I would jog over the hill, and I would bring the station wagon back. It would be empty, and they would get something out of the glove box, which I know now was a payoff. And that kind of an upbringing sort of shaped, altered, twisted, whatever you want to say, a lot of the viewpoints that I had on life. But Dad, that drinking and like I said, the damage that was done to him was unsustainable, and he died at 44 in 1979. I had just gotten out of the Marine Corps, and his body just couldn't keep up with the load it was carrying. And that created a lot of issues, I suppose, in my thinking, a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of searching for my ideal of what a father should be. And it left a lot of holes that had to be worked out over the years. I'm at great peace with it now. Like I said, I won't dishonor my father because life is that way. And sometimes you get hit by the truck and you get back up. Sometimes you get knocked down and you stagger down the road and you fall a lot. that's just the way things is, and you can't hate people. You can't carry baggage from that. And one of the good things about being 65 is that you have time to reflect on these things, and they're not as personal, other than to the individual that it's happening to, if you understand what I'm saying. I can look at it and go, well, what ran over that person to get him there? Now, that doesn't relieve anyone of personal responsibility. At some point, you've got to stand up and look in the mirror and go, I'm shaving the worst problem I have. And so Dad shaped, that's some of Dad's influence. And Uncle Gene was like my grandfather. He was a bright spot coming up because Dad was gone a lot after the accident, and we lived in a house that I wouldn't keep dogs in now. It was just a wooden shack that had 4 rooms. We had an outdoor well, outhouse. The walls, the walls literally had newspaper plastered over boards, and then it had wallpaper over that. And we had a coal stove. And Uncle Gene, he was one of those people that wherever he was at, it was happy. And he would always make a point to stop by, and there were 6 of us children, and he would always stop by with something, candy, something. He would take us fishing or whatever, and he was just always a bright spot in, and some long days from time to time. And when I got out of the Marine Corps, I knew he'd worked on the river for a while. And in 1979, things were starting to shift because of that grain embargo. And there weren't a lot of really good jobs. And he said, well, you ought to try the river. And that's how I actually started on a boat with him, a little outfit out of Port Arthur, Texas, and on the Jane Hoagland. And we worked together for a while, and then he moved on, and I went to another outfit called Herbert Material. But that's the quick and dirty of how those 3 individuals, influenced the way I view the world.
Well, you mentioned the Marine Corps. In our first meeting, you discussed a couple of stories from boot camp. And then, of course, I think it was tough finding job placement with the Vietnam veterans returning and all that kind of thing. But do you have any other especially memorable Marine Corps moments?
Well, the biggest thing that the United States Marine Corps did for me, like I said, was taught me that there are too many limitations I put on myself that don't have to be there. I learned to endure and to press on. And as they say in the Marine Corps, I learned to embrace the suck. That's a saying that you hear, and it's not a rude thing. Is if things aren't going well, the common vernacular is, oh man, that sucks. Well, the Marine Corps taught me to embrace it, and I'll make the suck work for me. And if I were to sit down and had the capacity to remember, I could probably write down tens of thousands of times that attitude has carried me through life situations, towboat situations, my marriage, raising my children, just getting by day to day, to go, look, well, yeah, this is bad, but it could be worse, and I'm going to make the best out of bad. And there were things in the Marine Corps. What they were trying to do at Parris Island was to prepare you, because I didn't, thank the Lord, have to go to combat. But the biggest thing about combat is it's loud and it's confusing. It's outside of the normal behaviors and situations that you will be in, no matter where you're from, your ethnic background, your socioeconomic background. It doesn't matter. War boils down to its own set of things. And what they try to do at Parris Island, and with the Army and all branches of the service, is to get you used to functioning in the most out of sorts conditions that can come your way. And there were so many different things they would do. They had these obstacles where they had ropes going across this pond, and you were to climb up like you were going up the side of a ship, and then climb down across this water, and to drop off the other side to get you used to making rough landings. Well, one of the fun things they would do is, as you were crawling, they go, "Oh, Burkhart, you've been shot," and you had to drop with full gear on 20 feet down into this nasty water and get out. And try to help one of your fellow Marines get out of it, and just things like that. I look at the time, I thought these guys are nuts. You know, they're just mean. You know, they're being. But I look now, and like that situation with the chemical ship that I was telling you about at the first of the video, because you understand, look, it's not going to go your way. The vast majority of the time, it's not going to go your way. And if it's loud and it's confusing, if you will focus on what will keep me alive, what will keep my brother Marines alive, what will keep the crew downstairs on this boat that entrusts me with their lives, what will keep the crew on that ship and anyone else, you're able to focus down on what is important. What can I get out of this that'll make everything work, or at least keep everyone alive, and then we'll put the pieces back together after. And I don't know that I have the articulation to really emphasize just how strongly that impacted me and how it has carried me through all of my days. I didn't know there were so many names for a worthless individual until I got to Parris Island, because I mean, these guys could cuss you in 4 languages, and that was interesting. But there again, there was a point to it. It doesn't matter what's coming at you. What are you doing here? You know, are you prepared for it? And so, like I said, I'm eternally grateful for my time in the United States Marine Corps. And I would have stayed, but like I said, they were rotating our boys back from Southeast Asia, and as it should be, the promotions and the cherry job choices, as we called it, were going to them, and they earned it. And so when I got my time in, I looked at it, and it was going to be a slow go for a few years for me to be able to advance in the manner that I wanted to. And so I thought, you know, I just need to check this one in and move on. But the day they put me in the ground, I'll be a Marine.
Yes, indeed. Taking another slight diversion, because you did make mention of it. Tell me a little bit about the grain embargo and how that affected your career.
Okay, there was well, it just goes to show there's no new thing under the sun. In the 80s, the Soviets were making incursions into Afghanistan. And of course, back then, you know, the Soviets were the great Satan, and we were fighting them by proxy. The United States wasn't engaged in a physical war, but through espionage and the outfitting of different parties in various parts of the world where we both had interests. They made an incursion into Afghanistan, and the United States, I believe it was the 1980 Olympics, we boycotted those Olympics. And then because they were not getting enough grain in the Soviet Union at the time, one of our biggest customers was the Soviet Union, and Jimmy Carter, or his administration, put an embargo on the grain that was going from the United States to the Soviet Union. Well, there were a lot of other factors involved. There were some, like there is now, interest rates had gone through the ceiling, and farmers had been overextending themselves for a while, buying land and machinery and other things at these exorbitant rates, because you could, if you could fall through the door of a farm bureau office, you could borrow enough to buy 2 farms. You combined overstretched farmers with all of a sudden the non-sale of the grain that they're leaning on to make those payments. And then there are other factors involved that shut down to some degree the economy of the United States and many parts of the world. The river was especially impacted in many ways because, as is today, grain haulage is the bread and butter. That's kind of that's how we make our Christmas money, if you will. When grain season's in, we're kicking it. And because that embargo lasted, I'm thinking 3 years, but I could be mistaken. It's been a while. It's been 40 years. But that hammered the industry. I can remember I was fortunate. I worked for an outfit that pushed coal. It was owned by Tampa Electric. It was the old Mid-South Towing. And so coal was our primary product. So we weren't as impacted as other areas of the industry. But I remember going up on the Illinois River and through Cairo, Illinois a couple of times, and it looked like a used car lot. There were just boats tied up to moorings everywhere and not moving. And a lot of people left the river And that had larger impacts because over those years, because there were so many mariners that weren't working, when things picked back up, they started at a slow pace for about, and there again, I'm just throwing numbers out here because I don't know how long it was, but there was many years, probably up to 10 years, very few pilots were made. And at the time, it didn't make any difference because there was an abundance. There were more than enough people to run the boat you had. And the wages dropped down somewhat because guess what? There wasn't that much work. And if you wanted to work, you worked for what was there. And it kind of stagnated the wage. And the wages are I have no problem whatsoever with the wages I make right now. I'm very blessed. And I think Ingram and all the companies out here, of course I want more money. I'm greedy. But I think they're catching up. But that pilot shortage, we're really seeing that now because my generation is like the cusp of that bubble. All the companies I know of are frantically trying to produce mariners right now because of that gap that was created during that dead time. And as my peers, the guys who trained me up, are retiring outright and left, there's a gap that's not been filled because they weren't producing pilots for as long as they did. And we're seeing that now. That's why you see so many old dudes like myself being paid quite well to continue doing what we're doing as long as we can breathe and make it up and down the steps.
We are glad to have you there for sure. Let's get back into your story. Was your maritime career, was it after the Marine Corps? Did it begin after that, or was there any time before?
It began after the Marine Corps. Once I got out of the Marine Corps, I tried my hand at a couple of different things in factories. And like I said, I told you, I actually put in and was accepted for pre-med at Austin Peay State University, but I needed a car. And so I thought, well, I'll go to work on the river, just work a summer, get enough to get a car, and then I'll start college. That was 43 years ago, and I haven't quite made it to school yet because once I got into the rotation, and back then, comparatively, wages on the river, the quote, good factories around home, I was making probably a third more than guys who were working at places that have waiting lists, for employment. And once I got used to having that cash in my pocket and my addictions were starting to find their legs, they weren't strong then, but I was really enjoying the lifestyle because I had money, I had a good car, had my first Harley, praise God, and things were rolling along just fine. And like I said, the river for a functional alcoholic is a perfect, opportunity to be employed and still, debauch yourself to a great degree.
Tell me a little bit about, I guess, about your introduction to the world of bikers and what led you to drugs and alcohol, crime. What landed you in that jail cell? I think you said for a 45-day hitch.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, you don't just wake up. And before I say, I want to put a caveat, there is nothing wrong with a person having a drink or two and enjoying themselves and relaxing. I am very comfortable. I just got back from Washington, D.C. with a group of friends that went to represent the river industry. And every night at dinner, they would have their drinks and a beer or two. And there's not a problem with that. It's when it becomes the driving force in a person's life and starts stealing from what could be a productive life is when it's a problem. I want to give that caveat before I start. I was bookish in high school. I was like a nerd. I read continually and didn't get out a lot. Didn't even go to the prom, as a matter of fact. When I got in the Marine Corps, one of the great things about the Marine Corps is the military truly is and always was the great melting pot. I got to hanging with African American Marines, and when you become a Marine, the color of the hide, the where they're from, their beliefs, none of that matters. He's wearing green, I'm wearing green, and I've got your back, cuz. And I started hanging out with a variety of individuals, and of course, Marines are known for their hard drinking and fighting. Well, you know, being a Marine, I had to try it. And so the hard drinking came along. Fighting, you really can't call what I did fighting. I was more of a punching bag. When you're 5'6" and got a smart mouth, people knock you down pretty quick. So that never lasted. But, you know, it was just fun. We went out, yucked it up, had some drinks, and that was cool. When I got out of the Marine Corps and started working, a lot of the people, to get to the biker thing, a lot of the people from the little community where I was raised around Bumpus Mills and Big Rock, Tennessee, were iron workers. And they worked all over the country, you know, hanging steel. And a lot of those rode Harley Davidson motorcycles. Some of the dearest friends I had, people who were friends of my family for years, had them. And I got interested. And then I bought my first one in 1980. And it's one of those things, you've heard the saying, if I have to explain it to you, you wouldn't get it anyway. The first time you set on a motorcycle and it's just you and the wind and the road and a view of a country you may have driven through 1,000 times in a car, all of a sudden the old home place looks different. You can smell the smells, you can see the sights. And I was hooked. I was in love. And the vast majority of bikers are just like everyone else. They go to work, they come home, they want to take care of their families. They want to do what's right, and they're part of the bedrock of what makes this country great. So I started riding, and there was a group of us that rode together, and of course we had our parties and we did our thing, and but we all worked and we took care of each other. There were excesses on the edges, and I won't blame them because I'm going to make an analogy that may seem a bit off place, but there's something that I've noticed over the years as a mariner. When there's a flood and there's drift in the water, drift tends to bunch together. If you've noticed that, it'll get in an eddy and you'll see a lot of drift. Well, dead animals do the same thing. It's weird. Animal carcasses will be drawn to one another. If you see an eddy, you'll see several of them if they're out there. Well, as you go through the steps and layers of addiction, you will find yourself drifting to those who mirror your behavior for a multitude of reasons. And as my biker friends, they went on, a lot of them, the vast majority of them grew up, they kept their motorcycles, but they got married, they had families. The hit the road and party all night wasn't that important to them. I, on the other hand, my nights started getting longer, and my wife and I there's a song by Jackson Brown called Redneck Friend. And that's what I met my wife. She was slumming with her cousin 40 years ago. As a matter of fact, we were laughing about that not long ago. And I came in to this house where she was, and I saw her, and I'd never seen anyone that as beautiful as that in my life. And there I was in a pair of bib overalls with catfish guts on my boot, because we'd been fishing, and I literally fell in love with it the night I saw her. And I told her I was going to marry her. Of course, she laughed. And but we ended up becoming friends. And just to give you an example how an addict does, by that point, I was partying quite a bit. I was selling a little bit of something on the side to support my habit. But we would go out, she and I, just as friends, and we would have dinner, go dance, goof around, have a few drinks. And I would carry her in a good state. But that's when the addiction, then I would go on out and I would find those, as the Garth Brooks song says, I'd find my friends in low places, and I would go ahead and get trashed. And the longer you go with that, the more you feel like I can't get out of it. And like I said, that's why I deal with people like that now, because there's a mindset that comes that, well, this is what I am. My dad died drinking. So many people I know died drinking. I used to go to AA and NA meetings. I would get DUIs from time to time, and they would send me to AA. And heck, I'd end up having a beer with the instructor, or I'd smoke a joint with the NA dude that was teaching me how to live without drugs. So there wasn't a lot of help there. And I'm not knocking them, because a lot of these programs do an enormous amount of good, and I'm 100% behind them. But an example I use with the guys in the jail, addiction is like those little merry-go-rounds in the park that you spin and children sit on. They hold onto a bar and it goes around, and it's fun. But addiction is like you get on that thing with your friends, and you're all going around at the same speed, and it's fun. You're laughing, and you can get off whenever you want. Well, your friends will get off, and addiction is like that mean kid that comes along, the big high school boy, that starts spinning it faster than you can stand. And all of a sudden, you find yourself going around so fast, that if I let go, I'm going to die. And you think, well, this is it. Just like that child that's holding on to that bar, you hold on to your addiction because you're pretty well convinced that you'll die. And in my case, it took a supernatural event to show me that I don't have to die that way. But anyway, as years went on, I was able to work, because one of the things, like the whole time, one reason why I think I lived as long as I have and outlived my friends is because the Marine Corps taught me a love of PT, working out. Even to this day, it's kind of a joke that the old man still does burpees. I would get up, I could come in at 4:30 in the morning, so drunk I couldn't stick my hands in my pockets, and by 8 I would go out and run 3 miles. And oh, it would hurt. Oh my Lord. I'd take off, in the first half mile or so, I would be sweating golf balls. But by the time I got a mile and a half in, I had sweated through that, and I felt like $1 million. And I think that's one reason why that lifestyle didn't destroy my internal organs and do a lot more damage than it has to people I know, because I worked out. But because of that, and because I could sweat it out, I would get on the boat. I would work my 28 to 35 days, clean and dry. Of course, I missed it, but I never did go into delirium tremens or any of the horror things that you've heard about. And of course, for the first 10 years or so, I was on the river, the transportation industry wasn't doing drug tests. So, if I needed something to augment my, my addiction, I could carry a little weed and get that. But even when they started, I was able to toss the weed aside and just debauch myself completely while I was off the boat. That added to the deception, because I thought I don't really have a problem because I can quit for 6 months plus out of the year. And so that went on, but it started getting worse and worse, and I would start getting DUIs. And even my biker friends would go, dude, man, you need to kind of get a handle on this, because you're always the last to leave, and I'm not riding with you. You're going to have a wreck and you're going to kill someone. And of course, I'd be, yeah, okay, bro, I'm cool. Well, these things kept going on, and I started riding with some people. I still have my friends. I love my brothers to this day. So many of them are still around, and if they called me and said they needed my truck and $1,000, I'd take off to Tennessee right now. But late evening, I started running with these rougher cats, and there's no love, there's no camaraderie, there's no fellowship in those types of groups. It's just what you can get for yourself, and fooling you if you don't. And the DUIs got worse. The drug addiction I got to the point where if you walked by me and I was torched and you dropped 2 pills in my hand, I'd take them. I didn't care what they were, and I didn't care. Well, sometime in the latter part of the 1980s, I didn't care if I lived. I would get out of jail, and I would sweat it. I would go, look, I'm done. I cannot do this anymore. And I would swear off, and I'd say the prayer that all alcoholics and crybabies do. Lord, you get me out of this, and I swear as I ain't gonna do it no more. But I was trying to white knuckle it. I was trying to do it on my own, and I'd be good for a week, 2 weeks maybe. And I would wake up somewhere, not know how I got there, not know where my motorcycle was, not know where my car was. Sometimes beat all to pieces. Sometimes with tattoos that I still can't tell you where I got. That's one of the big mysteries of my life. I don't know where this thing came from, but um, that's not life. And I hated my life. I hated what I did. I loved the river, but I had been on deck by that time for 12 years, and the idea of going in the wheelhouse, I thought that, you know, something like me can't do that. So I'm gonna be a deckhand until I get fired, or a mate at the time, and that'll be it. I mean, my life was on a flat plane, and I hated it, but I couldn't quit drinking, and drinking just would numb whatever was going on. Well, fast forward to September of 1989. I went to Nashville with my wife and some friends, and I was trying to maintain. And by then, it got to the point that that's the first time I'd fallen off in front of her. But I took a couple of pills, and basically, I sent her off with her cousin, or the people that we were with, because I was gone, and it was going to get bad. And I went into a blackout, and I woke up in jail in Sumner County, Tennessee. And that's where the thing that I told you about. I woke up and I was bloody from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet, and I thought, well, I've been in a car wreck. Must be what happened. And I did have a wreck, but that wasn't all of it. And I was so sick. I hope anyone listening hasn't had it, but if you have, you know what I'm talking about. I had the cocaine shakes. I'd been doing coke for 4 or 5 days, and drinking anything come by. I mean, I was so sick I couldn't hold on to the water that they brought me. And that's the lowest point of my life. I was done, and I was so sick. And the jailers, when they would walk by, I was in a single solitary cell in this little old Andy Griffith looking jail down in Sumner County, Tennessee, and they would curse me when they walked by, and I thought, what's their problem? I thought, these guys I'm in jail. Why are they mad at me? Well, the longer I sat there, the more I got to thinking. People have been telling me for a while that you're going to have a wreck and you're going to kill someone. And so I thought about that, and I thought, well, no, that can't be. I'm too good for that. Well, the longer I sat there, I thought that's why those jailers are mad at me, because I have done that. I've had a wreck and I've killed someone, and that's why they're angry. Well, the longer I sat there, the more I became convinced of that. And as cornball as it sounds, at the time I was so hardened, I didn't think about the hole I may have torn in someone's family. I was sick, and I was so full of regret, not because at the time my mind was so seared and hard that I wasn't concerned at that time about what I might have done to some family by running into them and killing someone. My concern was the fact that my mother, who had endured my dad and his alcoholism, was going to find out that her eldest son was a drunken murderer, because that was what I was convinced had happened. And the longer I sat there, the more convinced I became of that. And I'd been wanting to die for a while. And I sat there, and there was an old iron coat hook right by the door. It was a big old heavy thing. They don't do that now in jails. This was an old, probably pre-60s jail. And I looked at that. I thought, I'm done. I'm gonna end this. And I took the sheet off my bed, and I tied 3 half hitches in that coat hook. And I was mate on the A and B at the time, I was still on the Anita M. But I was good at what I did. When I tie a knot, it stays. And I stood on my tiptoes, and I had on some long sleeve coveralls because it was kind of cool. And I took those off, and I tied the arms around my waist. That way, when I hanged myself, I was going to run my hands through where I had tied that. That way I wouldn't be able to untie myself, because I knew I was a coward. And So I stood on my tiptoes and I wrapped that thing around my neck twice and tied 2 half hitches there. And then I put my hands through where I tied those sleeves around my waist. And I was sitting there and I was crying and slobbering and feeling sorry for myself. And like I said, I'm not going to get preachy. It's who I am. Jesus Christ is the center of everything I am and do. But I was sitting there crying, feeling sorry for myself. And I said some kind of prayer, and I don't remember the exact words. I just said something like, well, if you got anything for me, you better do it now, because I'm done. And I stepped off the end of that bunk and I landed on the floor. And so I'm laying there with my hands tied to my waist and that thing around my neck. And I could feel the coldness of that concrete floor on my shoulder. And I thought, well, am I dead? I didn't know. And the end of that sheet that I had tied on that coat hook up there floated down. And like I said, I don't know what your viewers think about things of that nature or the miraculous. And I'm not trying to be rude, but I really don't care. I know what happened. The end of that sheet floated down and it looked like it'd been iron, Tim. There wasn't a wrinkle in it where I tied that thing up. Why me? Why was I spared? I don't know. I've had better men than I'll ever be killed from here to the corner of my house from me. I've had friends die in every kind of accident due to alcoholism and this and that, but I was spared. And so I was laying there on that floor. I thought, well, I'm not dead. So I got up and I rolled over and I pulled my arms out and I untied that thing around my neck and I sat on my bunk and my head was clear. I didn't have the shakes anymore. And I thought, what just happened? Well, about that time, the jailers came up and there was like 4 of them and they had their like protective gear. And they said, all right, so we're going to take you out for your preliminary. Are you going to fight us? And I said, do what? Because I never was a violent person. And they said, it took 6 of us to get you in here last night. That's why I was so bloody. They beat me nearly to death to get me in because whatever it is I had taken made me insane. And they had to beat me nearly to death to get me in. And so I went to the hearing and I was looking at probably 4 to 7 years because I had some weapons with me and I rammed some police barricades. They put some cars to keep me from escaping and I rammed those a couple of times and did a few other things that I'm not going to glorify here in this conversation. And I was looking at some serious time at Brushy Mountain. And so I got out and waited for my trial date. I mean, there's nothing I could do except go to trial. And I went, and here's the second miracle. And why me? I don't know, but this judge had a reputation. She hated DUIs. This woman would throw the book at DUIs, and with what I had done, I was fixing to get down the road. And my attorney said the best we can do is plead you down maybe to 2 years. He said, I'm not sure about that. So we're sitting there, and she's looking at me like I'm a spot on the wall, and I thought, I'm done for. And I got to backtrack, though. When I got out of jail between then and going to trial, I wasn't clean. Within 18 hours after getting out of jail, I got gloriously drunk and stayed that way for a week and a half. But then I cleaned up and I went to trial. And I'm sitting there and I know my life has got to change. And before I went to trial, I woke up from that week and a half debauch and I was in the car of one of the best friends I've ever had. And I won't say his name because I don't want to embarrass him. But this guy is a biker. This guy is, he's my brother. I've known him since I was 5 years old. And he's my brother from a different mother. And I was in the car with him. And I kind of came to and we were headed home. And he said, I got to tell you something, bud. I said, sure. Yeah, you know what? He said, I don't want to see you anymore. I said, what? He said, I don't want to see you anymore because you're breaking my heart. I said, do what? He said, you want to die. He said, you quit partying a long time ago. And he said, I can't watch this anymore. And he said, until you get yourself straightened up, so please don't come around me. I've been cussed at, preached at, fussed at, incarcerated, and a whole lot of other things. But that statement coming from an old biker snatched my chain like nothing else, Tim. And I thought, if I get out of this, if I get through this trial and things aren't, I've got to straighten up. Something's got to change. So I went to trial, and just before, after everything was presented, this lady got this weird, the judge got a weird look on her face, and she said, I want the bench cleared. So everyone stepped back, and she said, Mr. Burkhart, come up here. I thought, oh my God, she's going to give me life. So I went up, and she leaned forward, and she said, if you whisper one word of this, she said, I'll put you in jail till you won't see the sunshine. And a tear came in this woman's eye. She said, I've got a daughter your age. And said, she's in the same shape you are. And she signed up for the same treatment center that you did. And she said, I don't know why I'm doing this. But she said, I'm going to send you, you're going to get 45 days in that medium security facility. And she said, if you go 2 years without any type of infraction, we'll purge it. But she said, you better listen to me, sport. She said, if you so much as spit up in the air, I can remember every word she said. She said, if you so much as spit up in the air, said, I'll get you 10 years. She said, are we clear? Yes, ma'am, we are. And so I stepped back. She called the attorney and the prosecutor up and explained to him what was going on. And I did 45 days in a medium security. It was kind of a transfer facility where people were going from one prison to another and different. And I did that, and I went to treatment. And while I was in jail, I met someone who presented to me the keys to the life I live right now. And of course, I wouldn't make a wart on a good Christian's big toe, but I've had a mighty good run since then, Tim. I cleaned up. I went back to work. And there again, here's an example of the type of people we have on the river. Everyone knew Beaver, the nutcase. Everyone knew Beaver, the jailbird. Everyone knew what I was. And when I came back, I didn't expect anyone to believe I had changed, because every time I came back to the boat, I said, I'm quitting drinking. Now, they were used to that. But after about 6 months, when people saw that it was real, that I wasn't doing it, I had people start stepping up and showing me how I could get in the wheelhouse, even at the advanced age. It wasn't old, but for getting in the wheelhouse, I was 36 when I got turned loose. So I was a little long in the curve, but I never got anything but help and encouragement from people, my peers, from people I didn't even know, because I got turned loose too early. And all I had to do was call a boat, and they go, oh, well, to make this lock, you need to go in this approach. And so all I can say is God's been good to me, and he's put me in an industry that takes care of its own.
Well, speaking of that industry, aside from the gentle kicks in the ass from your biker friend that didn't want to see you deteriorate any further, and a judge that maybe took some leniency on you, tell me how the industry maybe saved your life and gave it a new direction.
Well, first off, they knew the problem that I had, my peers, but I would come back and I would do my due diligence. And although they didn't approve of the life I was living, they gave me a chance to continue on. And then once I came back, one of the neatest things is when I first came back from my addiction, I started talking. Well, I got married first. I married my best friend. I'm one of those very, very, very fortunate dudes that actually married both the hottie of his dreams and his best friend. And I got the package. And my wife started encouraging me and said, look, if we're going to have a family and you're going to work on the river, why don't you try to move up and, move into the wheelhouse where, you can make some money. And I thought, well, that can't happen. And when I first came back and started, there was an individual. I approached him with it, and he laughed. He said, you've got to be kidding me. He said, with your background and your history, there is no way anybody's going to give you a chance to ever grab the sticks. He said, you're a loose cannon. And the old Mike Burkhart, the old Beaver, would have thought, well, okay, sport, when we get off the boat, you and I are fixing to go monkey flogging. Because if you ain't going to help me out, I might as well kill you. I still had some bad thinking back then, but I didn't. I thought, okay, number one, I'm going to prove you wrong. Number two, I'm going to pray for you. And that was a process, because I didn't like him. I didn't want to like him. He wasn't going to help me move up. But I was able to let that go and ask that man to be blessed. And he ended up being the guy that one of my greatest peers. He ended up encouraging and helping me learn a lot of the skill sets that I use to this very moment. And to me, that's one of the strengths of the river, is that, as that old John Fogerty song says, people on the river are happy to give. And like I said, I'm a Marine, I'm a riverman, and I know every industry's got its shining stars. But as far as a day-to-day consistent basis, the river is the one industry, because of the nature of what we do. We all are away from home. We all miss our families. We all have things we'd rather be doing, and we all have a task to accomplish. There's a bonding that takes place out there that's hard to explain to normal workplace situations. Most people go into work, they go home, but home is right there. Well, on the river, home is where you're at. And we're like a family. I've had my peers set me down and skin me like an ostrich and go, buddy, you need to pull it in and tighten it up. But I took it as a family member or a peer trying to help me run a better course. And I hope and pray that when I deal with young people to this day, that's what they get from me. That I want to see you get ahead. All like my crew, when I get a new guy on, I said, the first thing I want you to do is think about the job above you. You're going to do your job, but I want a green deckhand to start thinking about senior deckhand. I want that senior deckhand to start thinking about lead man. I want that lead man to start thinking I'm a mate. I want that mate, if he so chooses, to start thinking about, well, I'm going to go in the engine room, or I'm going to go in the wheelhouse, or, I want to make this a career, and I want to make this the best I can. And that's one of the things that the river has in spades. I work for a company that encourages growth, that encourages moving forward, and I think other companies do as well. But that's one of the things that carried me through and gave me strength, because a lot of people don't realize when you come out of a cycle of addiction like I did, there's a lot of missed ground. I had to find out who Mike Burkhart was again. I didn't realize you could fish with two hands. I thought one hand had to have a Budweiser in it, and the other one had a fishing rod. I didn't realize you can use two hands and fish. I mean, as cornball as that sounds, everything I did was framed off of my addiction in some way or another. And I got a lot of help from my peers about learning about. I didn't deer hunt till I was probably in my late 30s, because that wasn't interesting to me. I didn't want to sit in a tree when I could be out smoking weed, And I've gotten a lot of advice from my peers about just daily living skills that you may not get from another workplace. And so that's how the river has helped frame who this old boy is. And I think that uniqueness will always be there with all the technological advancements that we've made, and they're fun. They're good tools. They're great tools. There is still that looking a crewmate in the eye and knowing I'm going to see him day after day, and I'm going to work with him. And if not, we're going to find out why. And I think that's probably the one factor that makes this the most unique industry in the world.
Getting back to river stories, you mentioned
Okay.
in our first visit that you were, and I think you just said it a little while ago, that you were cut loose maybe a little bit too early. At 36 years old, I know you were learning on the job. Walk me through those first few hitches cut loose.
Well, to start with, um, the company I was with wasn't making steersmen. So I kept approaching him, and they wouldn't help me. So I said, well, I'm gonna quit. And I went to an outfit, and I won't name it because it's evolved into something else now, but it was what we call a fly-by-night outfit, held together with baling wire and spit, if you know what I'm saying. And they said, well, we'll make you a steersman. Okay, so I go over there. The day I get on the boat, they said, we don't need a steersman, we need a pilot. You're the pilot. Well, I was a mate that had a license. And I said, well, if you can stand it, I can. And so I got up there. God bless that captain. I work with that captain now. He's in operations at our company. He would get up at every lock and every bridge and walk me through it. And Tim, I was dry mouthed from the time I came on watch till I got off. I was terrified. I did not have a blue-eyed clue what I was doing. I had a few little inklings from steering with the captain that I worked with, and a few guesses that were right, a few guesses that were wrong. And I made it through that month, and the company I was with said, you're serious, you're going to go in the wheelhouse. I said, yeah. They said, well, we'll reinstate you back to your position and put you in the steersman program if you'll come back. We'll give you your time and everything. I said, oh, thank you, Jesus. Yes, I will, because the boat I was on was scary. So I came back, and they steered me. Well, we were on what's now the Arthur J. Carson, used to be the Ann Peters small vessel, and we were running the lower end of the Ohio, and you only had 2 locks and a very small tow. Well, I steered 3 trips, and the pilot that was working on that vessel got made captain, and they said, you can either be a mate or you can be the pilot on that boat. And like, I steered 3, okay, because I was desperate. But then I said, okay, yeah, all right. I lived on prayer, caffeine, and fear, because they said you'll never go past Mount Vernon, Indiana. And for those not familiar, that's a very short run from Metropolis, Illinois, on the lower end of the Ohio. And so, okay, I did that. Let's see if I can make this look better. And the first time I got on that boat, we went to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I had never seen that as an operator, Tim. So here we go. I go, and everywhere we go, that's another one of those things I was just talking about the river. I would talk to my captain. He would give me instruction on the various things I would approach. And if I was really whacked, he would say, well, get me up. Well, you can't keep your relief up all the time, because I'll wear that man out, and he has a function. So, and a lot of it too is I'm full of crap, and I'm an ex-Marine, and I'll BS my way through a lot of things. So I thought, I'll do this. So I'd be going along. Well, before I'd get to a lock, I'd call some of the surrounding boats and go, oh, yeah, how do you approach this lower end or whatever, to a man? Every one of them would give their approach, and I would make a hybrid of the information they gave me and from what I saw. And I never killed anyone. So evidently that worked, but it was a learning process. And I have been told many years past by very experienced mariners that I approach some things in a manner that they haven't seen very often, because I have cobbed together the Mike Burkhart approach to piloting. So I did that for, I think, 3 years, and I was approached to go up on the Illinois River. I said, Peachy, I'll go. You gonna post me? You gonna teach me this? Oh yeah, no problem. So we take off from Cairo, Illinois, on the motor vessel Audrey Fouts. My posting pilot gets off above St. Louis. Didn't even go in the Illinois with me. What am I supposed to do? My captain says, don't worry about it. I'll help you. But there again, pride stepped in, and I didn't want to wake him up. But I had a mate that had been running that river for 20-something years, and this guy knew that river better than most pilots. And I was talking to him one day. I don't know what I'm going to do. He said, if you'll listen to me, you'll make every bridge and every lock on this river. I said, buddy, I know who's getting a card this Christmas if you get me through this one. And he did. His instruction, literally, at first I was just following. I couldn't even look around. I was just following his instructions and getting in these locks and through these bridges. But after I got a little bit more comfortable, I started looking about and finding my own waypoints and my own markers to get in. And I started developing that toolkit. And so I ran the Illinois for 6 years. Didn't kill anyone there either. So I was told when I first started decking, I worked with an old captain. His name was Dick Miller, and he was on the river during the Depression. And this old man he was like just a plethora of information of the old ways of the river. And he told me he said, when you get in the wheelhouse, he said, every river is challenging and every river is a man's river. He said, every river is a river that will make you a living. But he said, if you want to stay out here and reach the top, learn the lower. And I never forgot that. So when the opportunity came to post on the lower, I jumped on it. Well, I made one trip south, and they figured out pretty quickly that I could run northbound without any help because I knew the river. I knew the waypoints. And so I made like, I don't know, 6 months worth of just northbound. I'd run north and they'd fly me south, put me back on another boat. And the vice president of operations came to me one day and said, when are you going to be ready to go southbound? I said, when are you going to teach me? I said, I've been running northbound. I made 2 southbound trips, 3 southbound trips, and was turned loose on the motor vessel Carol McManus. And the captain, Wilson Alexander, one of the dearest friends I have, once again, took me under his wing, would get up, never complained. And he started teaching me, because Wilson is one of the most precise captains I've ever been with. I mean, he looks at things and everything is a mathematical equation to him. And he taught me, and I started getting more comfortable as time went on. And I'm still learning. You know, you were talking about low water. To me, it's like a lot of professions. When you stop picking up nuances of what you do, it's time to move on. And the lower, there are so many nuances: low water, high water, heavy tows, light tows, wind with empties. I mean, there's so many things that can be factored in. You cannot know it all. And to me, that's what keeps me coming back every month, is that there's something out there that I haven't seen and I want to try it.
Did you meet Coy Lawrence and Billy Watkins while you were on the Illinois?
I met Coy. Coy was my relief for quite some time. And Billy, I met Billy when I was running the Ohio. He was still mate, and he was just before getting into the program. And both are just the dearest of friends now. And Coy, I mean, Coy's Coy's a celebrity. Everybody knows Coy, and everybody knows Billy. Both of them are both blessings to my life, and a very much an asset to the river industry.
Do you find any shift in the culture over the years where when you were first cut loose, begging for help on the radio, has that devolved at all over the last 30 years or so?
Only because of the demographic shifts that we see nationwide in all industries. The willingness to help is still there, but without getting into a generational finger pointing, there are a lot of people that are more dependent upon the technological tools that they have rather than the practical, hands-on, instinctual tools that I believe have to be a baseline of a good operator. A lot of guys can't answer the questions in a fashion that will help a young mariner to be comfortable, if you understand what I'm saying. These guys understand their Rose Point, their AIS, their electronic mapping. They understand the computer assists that we have so much better than even I do, and I love these tools. But we're, especially with the smaller vessels, we're seeing a lot of guys that are snatched off of a route and given an electronic chart and told, you can run this river. And because they don't know these things, it's almost sad. I'll have young men call me and go, sir, I'm at the mile, blah, 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 instead of knowing the name of the day board nearby. Can I wait here? Can I do this? Can I do that? And I'll go, let's go to another channel, and have to, kind of walk them through that to get them to a place where they're comfortable. And to me, that's something that's slowly being lost out here, is the ability to give the practical nuances to younger pilots. But that being said, like where I work, there's still enough seasoned hands bringing these young guys in that they're getting the immersion that they need to be safe and practical pilots. But there is that, and in some ways it's good. A lot of the old ways can be improved, but there is a baseline skill set that's based on reading the river, being able to look at the shoreline and the dike placement and where the current's going, and being able to go, I know before I get there what this place will do to me, that your Rose Point, your these wonderful tools that we have will not tell you. And like one of the biggest things that is developed, and there's a phrase that's in the industry that I despise, but it's used, is meeting in bends, because your electronic chart will not factor in the fact that you are going to slow down northbound going into a bend. And that means it's going to take you longer to get to a place to where you can meet that southbounder coming. The term that's used, and so many northbounders use it, if you'll keep an eye on me, I can meet you at so-and-so. I don't like that, simply because what that person has done, he's put the onus on me, the southbounder, to make sure that he makes it, when we as mariners should be able to make that decision together. When he knows, because it's usually used by people that know, unless I inconvenience myself and slow down and get out of the way, he's not going to make that bend. So what he's done is toss the ball in my court to make me have to slow down, even back up somewhat to get him through. And like I said, it doesn't make me angry. It's just irritating, because people are using that chart to fill in where good seamanship was the norm back in the day. And like I said, no one is there's not, this is not a finger point. This is not saying someone is evil or wicked or wrong for using that phrase, because everyone does it. And most of the time it's done in a timely manner where these arrangements can be made, and the passing and what have you is perfectly safe and acceptable. But there's a creep that it's getting more and more edgy, if you understand what I'm saying. And that, to me, that's a troubling trend.
Well, staying on the theme of river stories, you shared in our first visit, of course, the untimely passing of your sister Stacy, and
Mm-hmm.
the events that transpired between when you got that news and when you got back to your mother.
Mm-hmm.
Did any stories come to mind, not necessarily as personal, maybe with some friends over the years, that you've seen a unity of brotherhood out there for any array of reasons?
Oh gracious. Time and time again over the years. Well, even like the birth of a child, the river covers for one another. Like, well, I don't know, any life event that's big, like when someone has a child, it doesn't matter who they are. If they're the greenest deckhand or the most seasoned person on the boat, if they need to get off, there is no lack of volunteers to fill in that spot. They're going to get them home. If there's God forbid a tragedy like when my sister passed, you don't have to worry about someone filling in. Any life event that's major, say someone, God forbid, has a major medical event, I have seen countless hundreds of times, or even just the expression of sympathy, without pounding my horn too much. I had a deckhand that was he had been on our vessel but about a year or so, and the matriarch of his family passed. She was like his great grandmother, and was just, the bedrock of the family. And of course he had to get off, and we got him off, and we got someone else at home, and my crew got together and said, what are we going to send him? And I said, well, we'll put some flowers together. And then I thought, well, let's send some flowers, and we'll send something for the home also. And when he came back, he said his entire family was just flummoxed by the fact that people who'd never seen them, had never been near the town where they lived, would take the time, number one, to get him off, number two, to send our condolences in the form of flowers, and then send something for the family, you know, one of those gift baskets. And it the river had an impact outside of itself, if you know what I'm saying. These people knew nothing about the river industry, but they saw that the crew, that this young man, and without going into too much details, it was a cross-cultural thing as well. I mean, it's not the sort of thing that if you looked at the news, you would be expecting to happen. And that's not a big deal to us on the river. I don't care. And my crew doesn't care about the color of your hide. They don't care about what you do under your own roof when you're home. You're part of our crew. And that's something I think that America and the world could learn from our industry. Of course, there's problems. We're human beings like everyone else. But at the end of the day, if I see you close to the cliff, I'm gonna throw you a line. And throughout the industry, person for person, I'd say that's pretty much the standard. You know, like I said, you've got exceptions because we're part of the human race, and there's going to be jerks in every industry, but we go through those as quickly as possible. Do you understand what I'm saying? We try not to keep those around very long.
I think I do understand just fine. Yes, sir. Switching to a topic that was covered on my last episode, a couple of topics. Tell me the importance of good chief engineers and good cooks on board these vessels.
Okay, first off, chief engineers are a different species. They need to be living in a cave and gnawing on small animal bones. But when you need them, they're invaluable. And I say that simply because my chief and I are the best of friends. And I hate to even say this out loud because his head will explode, but the guy can do anything. And a chief engineer is like the hinge that a door swings on. You can have the most well-built door on the planet, but if you don't have a hinge that's well greased and oiled and maintained and kept tight, that door doesn't do anything. And the chief engineer is that link. And I have nothing but the greatest respect for these people that dedicate their lives to understanding not only why things work, but how I can keep it working. And I can give you an example. My chief, if you're familiar, Victoria Bend is one of the more notorious bends in the lower Mississippi. It's north of Rosedale, Mississippi. And on its best day, it's a booger. On it, and it's challenging in any stage of the river. And we were going down, and Victoria is one of those bends where you either flank it or you steer it, and you pray when you steer. And it was at the very, very edge of being able to be steered before you would start slowing down and flanking it. And I had set up what I thought was one of the most beautiful steers ever. And thank the Lord, I had just steered up and for the last time before I was set on the course I was going to take, lost steering. My steering rudders disappeared. I couldn't do anything. They were stiff. I hit the alarm. Before I could even hit the alarm, the chief called me and said, "There's a problem with the steering." I said, "You better forever know it." I said, "Yeah, because I can't do anything." And the Lord was with us. My crew came up. We assessed the situation. I lit that. Thank God I was on the John Donnelly, and I lit that thing up, and we took off. We got really close to the bank, but not close enough that anyone was in danger. Before I got that thing slowed down, my crew went back there. They cleaned up steering fluid off of that floor. The guys were all helping one another and watching one another, make sure it was safe. They got that work area cleared up, and he had that repaired before I got back in 45 minutes to an hour later. And we were ready to go. Called the Coast Guard and got all the clearances that we needed. And but that's just one of those examples. The chief, there's no way to overemphasize the importance of a good chief. And like I said, they're the kind. They're like Marines. In the Marine Corps, we have a saying: never stand when you can sit, never sit when you can lay down, and never miss a meal. Well, that's the chief engineer. When you see them just sauntering through the engine room with a rag in one pocket and a flashlight in the other, you think, man, that's the job to have. But the good ones are continually, they're listening, they're feeling all the systems on that boat, from electrical to your air, of course, to your main engine propulsion, the lighting, everything. They're watching. And these guys, they keep it going. And I have nothing but respect for a good chief. And we've got some great ones out there. And they're the one, everything's fine till it breaks. And then that's when they step in, and that's when you see what that man or that woman is made of. And the same, the cook, how do you say this? A good cook can set the tone of a vessel, not only by the foods that they produce, but by the attitude. Because without getting too homey sounding about it, all of us grew up where the kitchen was kind of a hub of what we did growing up. You know, you had your stories as a family in the kitchen around a good meal, or you know, even your good times running around. You know, you had good food, and if you had someone that enjoyed what they did, it just made the ambiance so much better. And a cook, it's almost putting too much on them, but a cook that likes their work and brings a good attitude to their work just sets a tone for a better attitude throughout the entire crew. And like I said, the cook is the hardest working person on the boat. They cook 3 meals a day, every day, and snacks and all, and so many of them do so much more. But they are up, for, like I said, for those 3 meals they put away. They inventory their groceries. They keep all that going. I may get a break if we're stopped in fog or the river's closed. You know, I can back in. I put my feet up and do this and that. The chief, if things are running properly and all the systems are lubricated and what have you, the chief can kind of ease. My deck crew, when the tow's built and the boat's clean and things are maintained and the projects are up, they can have a break. But that cook, we're going to eat 3 times a day. And so cooks are one of the underappreciated treasures that we have out on the river. And I've been very fortunate to work with a multitude of just wonderful human beings. And like I said, I have to watch that now at 65. You know, some of them are too good to be on my boat.
Any good stories come to mind, or any good memories from time around the dinner table with the chief engineer cutting up? Maybe any good pranks from your time on the boat?
Oh Lord, I'll have to find one that's PG rated. Oh goodness.
Maybe
Well, I'm
even
drawing a blank.
maybe even NC-17 rated.
Okay, well, yeah, but no, it just like I said, we have a good time, and we're continually prodding each other. Well, one of the things, we're all vain about our looks, and we all get to kidding each other about the cook adding bulk to our girth, and that's a thing that we kid each other a lot about. But one of the worst things, and this shouldn't have been done, and this is not on the boat I'm on now. We had a chief that was not quite a full-blown hypochondriac, and I had these 2 deckhands, and they were ornery. Those 2 guys were ornery as all get out. And this chief would be in perfect health, everything going wonderfully, and they would sit at the dinner table and go, "You feeling all right?" Yeah, feeling good, man. Okay, why? Well, I don't know, you just look a little funny. And they would talk to him and convince him, and within an hour, you would think he had leprosy. He would think they would convince him that he was sick. And then it would be a day this guy would just be moping around and there was nothing wrong with him. And they would just work on his head and tell you feeling okay? Yeah. Okay. What do you mean? Well, you look a little gray. And they would convince him that he was sick. And then I'd say, look, there's nothing wrong with you, man. You're okay. Well, I'm not sure. And just that kind of thing right there, just poking at one another. You don't let anyone know any of your idiosyncrasies, because they will grind on them a bit, not vindictively, but just for fun's sake. And you know how it is. You get a bunch of folks that work together sitting around a table. They're going to give you a hard time. Like me, I'm a garden gnome. Even now on my crew, I'm short, I'm bald, and I've got a beard. And they're always kidding me about, when you go home, do you stand in the yard with a red hat on? You know, yep, I do. And your name is off my list there, old buddy. So it's just that sort of thing. Uh, Gracious, like I said, when I go back in, I'll think of 50 different stories. But right now, I'm just drawing a blank.
Tell me about your recent trip to DC. What were you advocating for, and who was your audience?
Well, that was a privilege. We, as a company, have an advocacy group that tries to bring river issues to the attention of our congressmen and senators. The what we were talking about most at this point was the management of the low water and the upkeep of the infrastructure of the river. A lot of people don't know that a lot of the locks, especially those on the upper Mississippi, were built either before, during, or just shortly after the Depression. A lot of these facilities are 70, 80 years old. And upkeep is of prime importance. Number two is the maintenance of the waterways via dredging. Right now, the Corps is doing the best they can. A couple more dredges and a more immediate response would keep commerce moving more freely. With the Coast Guard, the Department of Transportation, the maintenance of buoys is absolutely crucial. And of course, the Coast Guard is crippled by the bulk of the buoy tending fleet that they have is 50 plus years old. They've got 5 new cutters coming out starting in 2025, but they're going to be a staggered release. And so what we did is we spoke to the office of, we spoke to 2 congressmen face to face and 1 senator. And we also spoke to the staff of 5 other offices. And I had heard the expression, but it was amazing to watch. Our country's actually ran by 25 to 28-year-olds. These staffers in the congressional and Senate offices are amazing. I mean, there's some driven, bright, intelligent, and I must say attentive young people. Every office we went to, there was at least 3 or 4 young staffers, and they gave us a good audience. They gave us a good listen, gave some good feedback. And it was kind of a privilege because in 4 instances that I can think of, they were really aware of the massive amount of commerce that takes place on the inland waterways. Because yourself, being a riverman, you can drive 15 miles east or west of Baton Rouge and people don't have a clue actually what's taking place. And to speak to these people and watch them take their notes and ask questions about, wow, we didn't realize that this affected the economy of the United States in the manner that it does. And then we were able to have the American Waterways Council is also one of our, the industry's representative groups. And they've got a fascinating website with some information from each state that is affected by the Mississippi and its tributaries. And you can actually pull up Louisiana and see how the river impacts, Louisiana jobs, Louisiana products being sent out, how it affects the economy of the state. And we were able to present these to each of the Congress people or the senators, based on the state they lived in. That made for some good interaction. And just to I'm 65 and you read about government. I try to stay topical on, matters of that nature. I'm basically a political agnostic. I don't believe in either party. So, but it was really neat to see how these things work. They took notes. They gave feedback. There was commitments to have farther conversations. And I think, being part of a team, I think our industry got a good plug, and there could be some things coming back that'll be beneficial to all of us. And so it was fun. And to walk through these edifices, I'd never been to DC before. And I didn't realize that there are 3 houses. I knew they were there, but there are 3 buildings associated with the House of Representatives and 3 associated with the Senate. And there's a lot of underground travel between them. And like the first day we were there, some of the guys with smartwatches, we walked like 18,000 steps the first day and 21,000 the second. I mean, you're going to cover some ground to talk to these people. And I felt like Jed Clampett in the city, because I'm telling you, I've read about the Washington Monument and we went to the Lincoln Memorial, and I don't care how jaded you get, these things are impressive. Our Capitol looks like a Capitol should look. And I realize we got problems, but without waxing too poetic, it was quite an experience for me, not only the interaction, but to see these things that I've read about all my life. And to give a plug for our industry, I think was was a privilege to be allowed to be part of that team.
What is the status of your outreach now with the community up there?
Well, it's really neat. I've got a school bus I told you that I'm refurbishing, and I've gotten some really skilled craftsmen that are coming on board to help me get the floor and the layout. And that's moving along nicely. Of course, winter's coming up here, but I'm probably going to be moving into a more senior position in the ministry that I'm with, as far as working with incarcerated individuals and the recently incarcerated. That's where my heart's at, because I know from my experience, when I would get out of jail, I didn't have a license, didn't have a whole lot of money sometimes. And if you sit around long enough, and this is not a condemnation of any organization or church or anything, but good people don't waste a lot of time coming around. And if you sit at home long enough, the others will. And I don't know how many times I've been sitting at home bored, and one of my old homies would pull up, and of course he would have all the materials that I did not need to be around, and I would end up back in the same shape. And so what I'm trying to do, and so many others better than myself, is set up an atmosphere in the bus where they can come and sit and have a cup of coffee, and my wife will make, snacks and what have you, and have conversation. Of course, we'll have Bible study, and I've got friends that are going to help. Some of these guys, I've raised dogs better than. It's just that simple. I'm not a bleeding heart. If you do the crime, you got to do the time. That's just the way life is. But once that threshold has been crossed, don't just toss someone out on the street, because a lot of these guys don't know about punctuality, about how you present yourself at a workplace, how to. One of the things up here in certain areas, domestic abuse is a real problem in a lot of the demographics related to drugs and alcohol. And a lot of these guys don't understand that these were created to encourage, to lift up, to assist the mother of your children or the lady that you're spending your life with. And these conversations can be had in a bus. And because of my unique background, it's not that I'm any better or anything, but it's like the old saying, if you want to stop people from stealing chickens, get an old chicken thief, right? And that's where I step in, and we can sit down and have conversations. And of course, I'm not a pie in the sky. A lot of these guys aren't going to get it, and they're going to go right back where they were. But if a small percentage can go home, and all of a sudden those little, I'm going to tell you what turned me on to this, Tim, and it still chokes me up. 20 years ago, I was going into a jail that I was ministering at. And when you go into the jail, you go through the lobby, and that's where they would have these visitations where the family sat on one side of a glass and the inmate sat on the other. And I was walking through, and every time you walk through, you would see these ladies, and they had this worried look on their face, and they, their world was whacked because the breadwinner was in jail. And you would see these little disheveled looking children kind of confused and wandering around. And one night I walked through, and there was this man sitting there, and he had his hand against the glass, and in front of him was about a 3 or 4 year old boy. And that little boy was looking up, and their hands were like crossing one another in the glass. And it's like the Lord told me, he said, that's where that boy's going to end up unless something intervenes. If something doesn't change, that child will end up behind that glass one day. And in the almost 30 years I've been doing this, I've seen it time and time again. If something doesn't break that cycle, and in my mind, my belief, and my firm conviction, Jesus Christ is the bedrock of it. But if a change of pace doesn't come in, that young man will follow in the footsteps of his peers. And that broke something in me and created a desire to try to do my little small something to stop that cycle, to where that young man, once he comes out from behind that glass, becomes someone who grabs that little hand and goes, son, you can do better than this. Daughter, you can do better than this. Let's learn a different way. And the community benefits, you know, the world benefits, society benefits, besides the fact that children don't have to grow up thinking they have no worth. And that to me is the biggest thing. Too many of the people, because I had that for a long time, I didn't understand that there's worth even in this guy right here. And too many of these guys I deal with, like I said, I'm not a bleeding heart. I've talked to men that have done things that make me want to just lay on the floor and cover my head. But so many of them came up in an environment where the fact that you have worth and you are not a product of what's around you, you don't have to be. Of course, environment plays a part. We understand that. But you do not have to be the product of what was done to you, because so many of them were abused. So many of them were abused. You don't have to be a product even of what the guy down the road thinks about you. I don't mean to get passionate, but that's where my heart is at. If we can be one little bulwark to let them slow down and let the noise die down and see that they've got worth in another venture besides something that's going to end up back in jail, then it's all worth it. And we're moving along. Like I said, the bus should be operational. Well, I'll probably take it out without seats here very soon before the weather gets too cold up here in northern Minnesota. Just have coffee with them and sit down and get it started. And we're also getting some venues. There's some coffee shops and others that are going to let us just meet and sit down and talk. And we'll just, this thing is, it's an organic thing. I've got guys that have career advice that'll come in and talk with us. There are people that have resources that have a lot better, if you will, way of defining family to these young men, so that they can understand that, you know, this doesn't have to be this way, that your family can be a unit that moves forward together, and, you know, put it in the Lord's hands and see where it goes.
Do any success stories from almost 30 years of doing this come to mind for these inmates?
Oh my goodness, yeah. One of my favorites up here, and I'll tell you two, because one of them has to do with my daughter, but one of my favorites, one of the scariest human beings I've ever seen in my life, he's got hot and cold tattooed on his knuckles, among the other tattoos. This guy was an enforcer for a pretty well-known gang around this area. When he came to your house, I learned from other inmates, when he came to your house, he left with either blood or money, sometimes both. And when he first started coming, he was sullen. He'd sit over and look at me like I could rip your head off. Stuff it in the toilet. There's nothing you could do. And he was right. And over the course of time, he and I became friends, and he gave his life to the Lord. And now he's one of my best friends. He is on board 100% with the bus. His children they just latch on to everywhere he goes. His children are just all over him. And the community sees that. I mean, I hear feedback from people in the community going, man, this guy, he's real. I'm not going to say nicknames or anything because I don't want to embarrass him or put anything out there, but people come up and go, man, that dude's real. I mean, we used to hide when he came through town, and now he's like, come on, man, let's go have some coffee. And just, he calls me on the boat every now and then, and you know, he calls me a sailor friend. And to see that change in a life that was that far out, it's amazing. And but a little kind of a funny story. About 12 years back, I was ministering at a facility that there was a lot of crossover. People would come from various jails all over, and there were some hardcore Crips from Louisville, Kentucky, that came through, and they got it. And one of them, when he was going back home, the gang had actually said they were going to let him get out because he had children, and that's rare among that bunch. And he was going to church there in a little, I found out late, it was in a strip mall in the middle of nowhere. And they called and said, Brother Mike, we want you to come up to our church and speak and fellowship with us. Okay. Now, this was before Google Maps was all that big. So I printed out a map, and this church was in the hood. Okay. I mean, in the hood. I stood out like a flag in the middle of the ocean. And we took off up there, And my wife and my children were fairly young at the time, and we went to Louisville, got off the interstate, and I mean, as soon as we got off the interstate, we knew where we were. Well, as we got closer, the pastor there had a good reputation with the gangbangers around. And when we got within a few blocks of that church, there were guys standing on the corner, and they had their bandana on. And I mean, these were some tough, hard-looking young men. And when I pulled up, they did this gang sign, and they just pointed. And I followed, and literally gangsters led me to this little church. And so we went in, and I mean, just had a grand old time. I mean, we had church, and we had lunch with them, and my children played with their children, and we hung out. And we left, and they wanted us to come back again. So a few months later, we went back, and the same bangers were there, but this time they grinned. When I drove by, they did their little thing, and they did their thing with their hand, and they grinned and took us in, and we fellowship. And my daughter now, she's 25, but she's like, she'll tell her friends, man, you're not gonna believe it. Gangsters took us to church one time, you know, and that's a big deal in her life. And to me, it's like I said, I don't want to sound too milky about it, but that's an example of our human condition. If you can break bread with someone, you can't hate them. If you can sit down and look across the table and go, you know, there are things that you experience that I'll never know. But you're a person, you've got children, you've got people you love, you've got people you want to keep safe. We can break bread together, and we don't have to agree on everything, but we don't have to hate each other either. And to me, that's the flowering of this outreach, if you will. Number one, of course, like I said, I'm a Christian, and I'm not ashamed of it, is to get that message to them. But that blossoms out to where we can get along. If you'll turn off that news and certain social media sites and just sit down with people, we don't have to be on the same page. And there again, that's a microcosm of what the river is like. And to me, I like taking that attitude. I don't care where you're from. When you get on the John Donnelly, you're part of my crew. Day one. Well, when you come to my bus, you're part of my gang. You're part of my friends. And I think if more of us, and everyone can't do this. This is not for everyone, but in our daily interactions, a smile in Walmart to someone that you normally probably wouldn't affiliate with might be the best thing that happened to that person's day. That's kind of my passion. And as I go on toward my retirement years, I can see this being full time.
Well, I do look forward to updates. What is your retirement outlook?
Probably 3 years. I'll be 60. The full retirement for me is 67 and 8 months, I think. And I'm 65 now. Probably then, I don't know. I love what I do. And I might budget a year or so on either side of that. And if they sweeten the pie, I'm like everybody else. I'm about half greedy. So, if they make it sweet enough. And there is some talk of taking some of we elder statesmen and utilizing us for training. And, I would be willing to work in that capacity.
Well, I do look forward to maybe doing this again with you one day. But before we wrap up, switching gears to something far less important, what do you think of this little project of mine? We're almost 70 episodes later now than after our first meeting.
I wish I could figure out a way to blast you out to a broader audience just to get them to nibble, because I don't think they'd walk away. Like all industries, I think way too much of your viewership is in-house, if you will. I know there's some outsiders because you've introduced me to a couple and gotten it around, but I think it's a treasure. I think it's a real treasure. When I'm on the boat from time to time, if I'm in my room and we've got signal, I'll scan through and listen to some of the conversations that you've had, and it's fascinating. And even if someone didn't know anything about this industry, the human element and what you bring into it with you ask some really insightful questions that bring people out of even their industry shell, if you will. I think it would be great benefit to a much broader audience. So all I can say is keep swinging, brother.
Well, it's certainly not for lack of trying. I know those pesky social media sites you mentioned, but they've built this to what it is so far. About 30,000 views or so on YouTube in about a year's time. So I think that's a decent start.
I think that's a start, but I just think too much of America's not getting a taste of the pie.
Well, Captain Beaver, I do appreciate your story, your voice, and your perspective on this little project of mine. I thank you very much for your time here yet again.
Well, Tim, it's always a privilege. And like I said, we're going to have that cup of coffee before it's all said and done.
Speaking of coffee, I forgot about that. I was asked to remind you that Captain Cohen Bush on the mighty motor vessel Port Allen at Capital Fleet does have a little coffee mix he's going to be sending up to you on a shuttle boat in these low water conditions. Hopefully it makes it all the way up to you.
Well, hopefully none of my peers drink it before I get to it. Well, you tell him I said thanks. I'll try to have some. He and I have this little coffee club thing going. I'll roast up the newest one that I brought in, and he'll give me that wonderful elixir that he makes. You'll have to come out and have a cup if we're down that way, okay?
One of these days, yes, sir.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to it, my friend.
Thanks a lot.
You take care.
You too.
This has been a production of Where You At Studios, LLC.